There is a particular burden that INTJs carry that few outside this personality type understand. It's not the burden of thinking too much, it's the burden of being unable to stop thinking. Not thinking as a choice, not thinking as an activity, but thinking as a constant, involuntary background process that runs from the moment they wake up until they finally force themselves into sleep. And even then, their dreams often continue the analysis. The INTJ's mind operates like a pattern recognition system that never powers down. While most people can observe a situation and move on, the INTJ's cognitive architecture automatically begins mapping patterns, recognizing connections, projecting implications, and synthesizing information into systemic understanding. This happens whether they want it to or not, whether it's useful or not, whether it exhausts them or not. When someone asks an INTJ, "Why do you overthink everything?" they're asking the wrong question. The INTJ isn't overthinking. They're thinking at the depth and complexity their cognitive functions naturally produce. The problem isn't that they think too much. The problem is that their mind literally cannot operate at the shallow, surface-level processing that most people find sufficient. Today, we're exploring why INTJs can't stop analyzing everything, not as a personal failing or anxiety disorder, but as the inevitable output of a cognitive architecture designed for depth, pattern recognition, and systemic understanding. This is what it means to live with a mind that was built to see more than the majority ever will. To understand why the INTJ can't stop analyzing, one must understand how their mind actually functions. The INTJ operates through a specific hierarchy of cognitive processes, with introverted intuition as their dominant function and extroverted thinking as their auxiliary support. Introverted intuition, NI for short, is not simply being intuitive in the common sense. It's a sophisticated cognitive process that operates largely unconsciously, synthesizing vast amounts of information into holistic patterns and future projections. When an INTJ encounters any piece of information, a conversation, an observation, a news article, a casual comment, their NI automatically begins processing it through multiple dimensions simultaneously. NI doesn't process information linearly, like this leads to that leads to that. Instead, it processes information systemically. This connects to 15 other patterns, which link to historical precedents, which project into future implications, which reveal underlying principles, which contradict surface appearances. All of this happens in what researchers call background processing. The INTJ doesn't consciously decide to analyze. The analysis simply occurs as their mind's default mode of engaging with reality. This creates what psychologists studying metacognition have identified as constant cognitive monitoring. The INTJ's mind doesn't just process information, it processes the processing. They think about their thinking, analyze their analysis, and recognize patterns within their own pattern recognition. This meta-awareness creates a recursive loop that most personality types simply don't experience at this intensity. When NI operates in its healthy expression, it's extraordinary. The INTJ can predict outcomes years in advance, recognize systemic problems before they manifest, identify solutions that others haven't conceived, and understand complex dynamics with remarkable accuracy. But the same architecture that produces these capabilities also produces a cognitive burden. The INTJ cannot turn it off. What others don't understand is that the INTJ's constant analysis isn't a choice they're making. It's how their cognitive functions process reality. And that creates a specific kind of exhaustion that most people have never experienced. Consider what happens when an INTJ attends a simple social gathering. Most attendees engage with the immediate experience, the conversation topics, the food, the pleasant atmosphere. But the INTJ's NI is involuntarily processing multiple additional layers simultaneously. They're noticing micro-expressions that signal discomfort despite cheerful words. They're recognizing conversational patterns that reveal relationship dynamics. They're detecting inconsistencies between what people claim and how they behave. They're projecting how current tensions will likely escalate in future interactions. None of this is conscious effort. The INTJ isn't trying to analyze the social dynamics. Their cognitive architecture simply cannot engage with the surface level alone. It's like asking someone to look at a photograph but only see the colors without noticing the shapes, the composition, the story, the technical execution. For the INTJ, pattern recognition is inseparable from perception itself. This creates what neuroscience research has identified as cognitive load, the mental resources consumed by constant information processing. While most people's minds rest between periods of focused thinking, the INTJ's NI maintains a state of what might be called cognitive hypervigilance. Their pattern recognition system scans continuously for anomalies, inconsistencies, and deeper meanings. This isn't paranoia, it's how their dominant function operates. The result is that simple activities that others find relaxing, watching a movie, listening to a lecture, having dinner with friends, become cognitively taxing for the INTJ. They can't just watch the movie. They're analyzing the narrative structure, predicting plot developments, recognizing symbolic patterns, critiquing logical inconsistencies. They can't just listen to the lecture. They're mentally reorganizing the information into more efficient frameworks, identifying flaws in the argument, connecting the content to broader systemic patterns. By the end of what others experienced as a pleasant, low-effort evening, the INTJ is mentally exhausted. Not because they have less energy than others, but because their mind was working at full capacity the entire time in ways that others simply weren't experiencing. Here lies one of the cruelest paradoxes of the INTJ experience. Their NI excels at analyzing complex, abstract, systemic problems, but this same function can trap them in what psychologists call analysis paralysis when applied to simple decisions. The INTJ can develop sophisticated 10-year strategic plans for their career. They can recognize systemic inefficiencies in organizational structures and propose comprehensive solutions. They can predict market trends years before they manifest. Their NITE combination makes them exceptional at this kind of complex, consequential analysis. But ask that same INTJ what they want for lunch, and their mind encounters a paradox. NI begins analyzing the decision at multiple levels: nutritional implications, time efficiency, budget optimization, alignment with health goals, future hunger patterns, social considerations if eating with others, environmental impact, whether this choice fits their identity. What should be a simple 30-second decision becomes a 5-minute internal analysis session. This happens because NI doesn't have an off switch for trivial decisions. The same cognitive process that serves them brilliantly for strategic planning applies itself to every decision, regardless of actual significance. The INTJ recognizes intellectually that lunch choice doesn't warrant this depth of analysis, but their cognitive architecture processes it anyway. This creates what researchers studying INTJ cognitive patterns call the NITE tension. NI wants to explore every possibility, every implication, every potential outcome. It generates more considerations, more perspectives, more angles of analysis. Meanwhile, TE, their extroverted thinking function, demands efficiency, decisive action, and concrete results. When NI overwhelms TE with excessive analysis, the INTJ experiences paralysis. Too much information to process efficiently, too many considerations to weigh effectively, too much awareness of consequences to commit comfortably. In healthy INTJ functioning, TE serves as a brake on NI's tendency toward infinite analysis. TE says, "This is enough information, time to decide and act." But when an INTJ is stressed, overwhelmed, or operating in their NI fee loop, bypassing TE entirely, the analysis continues indefinitely without reaching action. They become trapped in their own cognitive depth, seeing so many layers that they cannot simplify enough to choose. The INTJ's pattern recognition is both their greatest cognitive gift and the source of their most profound isolation. Because once an INTJ recognizes a pattern, they cannot unsee it. And most people never saw it in the first place. NI operates through what cognitive psychology calls unconscious pattern synthesis, the ability to connect disparate pieces of information into coherent wholes without conscious linear reasoning. The INTJ walks into a workplace meeting and within minutes has recognized the power dynamics, identified who actually makes decisions versus who has titles, predicted which projects will fail and why, and understood the unspoken conflicts beneath professional courtesy. This happens automatically. The INTJ didn't choose to analyze the organizational structure. Their NI simply processed the available data, who deferred to whom, whose ideas were dismissed versus adopted, whose presence changed the energy, what topics created tension, and synthesized it into systemic understanding. To the INTJ, these patterns are as obvious as the furniture in the room. But when they mention what they've observed, they encounter confusion or dismissal. "You're reading too much into it. How could you possibly know that? You're being paranoid." The INTJ realizes, often painfully, that what is transparently obvious to their pattern recognition is completely invisible to others. This creates a particular form of isolation. The INTJ sees preventable problems approaching. They recognize systemic failures that haven't yet manifested. They understand consequences that others won't acknowledge until they've already occurred. And they learn through repeated experience that speaking these observations aloud typically results in being labeled negative, cynical, or overthinking. The curse deepens when the INTJ's pattern recognition proves accurate. 3 months after the meeting, the project fails exactly as the INTJ predicted. 6 months later, the organizational conflict they identified becomes undeniable. A year later, the systemic problem they warned about creates a crisis. But rather than validation, the INTJ typically experiences something more isolating. Others treat these outcomes as unpredictable surprises, while the INTJ remembers clearly that they saw it coming and said so, only to be dismissed. They become trapped between two equally painful options: continue speaking patterns they perceive and face chronic dismissal, or remain silent and watch preventable failures unfold. Most INTJs eventually choose strategic silence, creating an internal burden of knowing what others refuse to see. Perhaps the most exhausting dimension of the INTJ's constant analysis is that they analyze their own analysis. This creates what researchers in metacognition identify as recursive self-monitoring. Thinking about thinking in potentially infinite regression. When an INTJ experiences an emotion, they don't just feel it, they simultaneously analyze why they're feeling it, whether the feeling is rational, what cognitive pattern generated it, whether their analysis of the feeling is itself distorted, and whether they're overanalyzing the analysis of the feeling. This metacognitive layer creates distance from immediate experience that can feel both illuminating and alienating. Research on metacognitive patterns reveals that individuals high in introverted intuition demonstrate significantly elevated metacognitive monitoring compared to other cognitive profiles. They don't just make judgments, they simultaneously evaluate the reliability of those judgments, the confidence levels appropriate to their certainty, and the potential biases influencing their metacognitive assessment. For the INTJ, this means that even their emotional life becomes subject to analytical scrutiny. When they feel lonely, their mind immediately begins analyzing. Is this loneliness a genuine need for connection or a societal expectation that I've internalized? Is my analysis of my loneliness creating more loneliness than the actual lack of connection? Am I being too rational about an experience that should be felt rather than analyzed? This creates what psychologists call the analysis trap, the awareness that excessive analysis might be the problem, which triggers more analysis about whether one is analyzing too much, which creates awareness of the recursive loop, which generates analysis about how to exit the loop. The INTJ becomes simultaneously the observer, the observed, and the observation itself. The NI-phi loop, where the INTJ bypasses their auxiliary TE function and cycles between intuition and introverted feeling, intensifies this metacognitive trap. Without TE's grounding in external logic and efficient action, the INTJ spirals deeper into internal analysis divorced from practical application. They become lost in their own cognitive complexity, seeing so many layers, implications, and perspectives that they lose touch with simple, direct engagement with reality. The advice that INTJs receive most frequently and find most unhelpful is some variation of "just stop overthinking," or "don't be so analytical," or "try to be more present." These suggestions fundamentally misunderstand what's happening in the INTJ's cognitive architecture. Telling an INTJ to stop analyzing is functionally equivalent to telling someone to stop breathing through their nose and breathe exclusively through their ears. The suggestion isn't just difficult, it's neurologically incompatible with how their cognitive functions operate. NI dominance means that pattern recognition, systemic synthesis, and future projection are not voluntary activities the INTJ can choose to engage or disengage. These are their mind's primary mode of processing reality. When the INTJ tries to stop overthinking and engage only with surface-level information, they're essentially attempting to suppress their dominant cognitive function, the very process through which they understand the world. Research on INTJ cognitive development reveals that attempts to suppress NI typically result in either NI-phi looping, where analysis continues but becomes disconnected from logical action, or temporary engagement of inferior SE, which manifests as impulsive behavior, sensory overindulgence, or present-focused activities that feel uncharacteristic and unsustainable for the INTJ. The INTJ cannot become someone whose mind rests in comfortable shallows. Their cognitive architecture is built for depth. The question isn't how to stop analyzing, which is impossible without fundamental personality alteration, but how to analyze strategically rather than compulsively, how to direct their pattern recognition toward productive ends rather than recursive loops, and how to accept that their way of engaging with reality will always require more cognitive resources than most people expend.